The clock in the living room had just struck noon when I heard my son raise his voice. I never thought I'd live long enough to hear that tone from him, sharp, commanding, like I was a stranger trespassing in my own house. Aaron stood there, his hand wrapped around a coffee mug that wasn't even his, and said, "Don't you argue with my wife in her house, Dad." Her house. For a second, I thought I'd misheard him. Maybe the echo in the room twisted his words, but Mila didn't correct him. She just crossed her arms, smiling that polite little smile that always meant she'd already won. I looked at them, two grown adults who had moved into my home to save money, and for the first time, I felt like a guest standing where my wife once cooked Sunday breakfast. It started with something small, like it always does. Mila wanted to turn the memorial room for my late wife, Lydia, into her new office space. "It's just storage now," she said. Storage. That room still smelled like Lydia's perfume, still held her old music box, the one that played when the power went out during storms. I told Mila as calmly as I could that some spaces should never be repurposed. She laughed softly, but enough to sting. "Raymond, we're just trying to make the house more functional." I turned to my son for backup, hoping for a flicker of understanding. But Aaron didn't even look at me. He sighed and said, "Dad, just let her do it. She's trying to help." That was when I felt it, a quiet shift in the air. The kind you can't see but can feel in your chest. The same walls I'd built with my hands now felt like they were closing in on me. The pictures I'd just been arranging, wedding photos, Lydia's smile, the baby Aaron in her arms, suddenly looked like relics from a life no one remembered but me. Then came the words that broke something deep inside me. "Don't you argue with my wife in her house, Dad." It wasn't loud, but it echoed like a hammer hitting the hollow of my heart. I stood still. My hands, rough from years of carpentry, were trembling. I looked at the clock. Its steady ticking felt cruel, like time itself refused to pause for my humiliation. The sunlight hit Lydia's picture frame just right, and her reflection glimmered faintly on the wall. For a moment, it felt like she was watching how small her husband had become in his own home. My lips moved before I could stop them. Her house. I built it with my own hands and buried my heart in its walls. Neither of them said a word. Aaron just turned away, pretending to check his phone. Mila muttered something about old traditions holding people back. I felt a lump in my throat, but no tears came. At my age, you learn that silence can be louder than shouting. I walked out to the porch, the same porch where Lydia and I used to drink tea every evening. I ran my hand along the wooden railing I'd sanded years ago, remembering every nail, every scratch, every bit of love that went into it. How strange, one sentence, and suddenly the house felt colder. Not because the heat was off, but because respect had left the room. You know, when you've lived long enough, you stop expecting grand gestures of love from your children. You just hope for quiet respect. A shared meal. A phone call that isn't about money or convenience. But in that moment, standing there with my son's words still echoing in my ears, I realized even that might have been too much to ask. I didn't shout back. I didn't throw them out. I just looked at the setting sun reflecting off the window and whispered, "Lydia, they called it her house." And somewhere deep inside, something broke, but something else woke up. I didn't know it yet, but that day was the beginning of a different kind of lesson. One about dignity, silence, and how sometimes the only way to keep your worth is to stop asking to be seen. If you've ever been in a moment like that, watching someone you love forget what you've built together, then you'll understand what comes next. And if you don't want to miss how this story turns, stay with me. Maybe, just maybe, It'll remind you why self-respect is the strongest kind of love there is. I still remember the day Lydia and I bought this land, back in '86. It was nothing but a patch of dirt and wild grass on the edge of town. Everyone said we were crazy, spending our savings on something that didn't even have a road yet. But Lydia just smiled, squeezed my hand and said, "Ray, we'll build our home here, not just a house, a life." And so we did. Every beam, every nail, every wall, I built them with my own hands. Lydia painted the shutters herself, the color of summer sky. We didn't have fancy tools, but we had time and faith, and that was enough. At night, we'd sit on the porch with coffee in chipped mugs, looking at the stars and dreaming about the family we'd raise under that roof. I can still hear her laugh from that first night we moved in. We had no furniture except a mattress on the floor and one old stove I bought from a neighbor. She made our first meal there, burned soup and half-cooked rice, and we ate like kings. She looked at me and said, "This house will always be the place our kids can come home to, no matter what." I didn't know that promise would one day be tested so hard. The years passed. The boys grew up, one by one leaving their handprints on the doorframe as they got taller. The house filled with noise, birthday candles, piano practice, the sound of Lydia humming in the kitchen. Those were the best years of my life. Then the noise faded. When Lydia got sick, the house became too quiet. I tried to keep things normal, cooked her favorite soup, put on her music, but cancer has a way of silencing everything. I still remember the day she looked at me from the hospital bed and whispered, "Keep it warm, Ray. Keep the house full of love even when I'm gone." When she passed, I carved a small wooden sign and hung it by the gate. It said, "Built with love, kept with memories." I thought it was just a phrase, but now I realize it was my vow. After she was gone, I kept everything the way it was. The curtains, her teacups, the chair she used to sit in by the window. Every Saturday I polished the floors until they shone. Every Sunday I made breakfast for two out of habit. 2 plates, 2 cups. One always stayed untouched. People said I was lonely, but I didn't see it that way. To me, it was just keeping her close. Aaron used to visit back then. He'd mow the lawn, bring me coffee, tell me stories about work. We'd sit out on the porch for hours, talking about life, about his mother. But after he married Mila, things changed. The visits got shorter, then stopped altogether. Calls came only when they needed something, tax help, a loan, advice about the roof. Every time the phone rang, I'd hope it was just a hello. It never was. I tried not to take it personally. That's what parents do, right? We make excuses for our children so the hurt doesn't cut too deep. He's busy, I'd tell myself. He's building his own life. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. When Lydia was alive, the house had gravity. It pulled everyone home. Without her, the orbit broke apart. Now, some nights, I sit in the kitchen alone. The clock ticks too loud. The light above the sink flickers, but I don't bother fixing it. I cook small meals that I barely taste, set the table for 2, then quietly put 1 plate away. The chair across from me stays empty, but I keep talking to it anyway. And tonight felt different. After what happened, after hearing my own son call this her house, I stood in that same kitchen, holding a cup of coffee gone cold, and looked at Lydia's photo on the wall. The silence felt heavier than it ever had before. I walked over, touched the frame gently, and whispered, "They call it her house now, honey. Can you believe that?" The picture didn't answer, but I could almost hear her laugh again, soft and steady, like she was telling me, "Don't you let them take away what we built, Ray." That's the thing about love. It doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape. It becomes the walls, the floors, the smell of old wood and morning coffee. And maybe that's why it hurt so much to hear those words from my son. Because this wasn't just a house, it was our promise made solid. But promises, I've learned, only stay alive if someone keeps them. And maybe it's time I reminded everyone, especially Aaron and his wife, what this place really stands for. When Mila first moved in, I told myself it was temporary, just a few months until they saved up for their own place. That's what Aaron said anyway. It'll help us all, he promised. You'll have company, we'll save money, and the house won't feel so empty anymore. I wanted to believe him. For the first few weeks, I really tried. I told myself it was nice having someone new in the house, hearing laughter again, footsteps down the hallway. But laughter fades fast when it doesn't belong to you. Mila came in like a storm with a smile. The first thing she said when she stepped into the living room was, "We need to modernize this place." Before I could even ask what she meant, boxes started arriving. Sofas, rugs, curtains, all sleek, shiny, and cold. My old wooden furniture, the ones Lydia and I built together, got pushed aside like they were firewood ready for the dump. I remember standing by the doorway watching her hang new drapes, bright white ones that swallowed the warm afternoon light. The room didn't glow anymore. It just looked sterile. What happened to the yellow curtains Lydia made? I asked, trying to sound casual. Mila turned and said, "They're too old-fashioned, Ray. We'll store them in the attic. Don't worry, they'll be safe there." Safe there, that's what she said. But I knew that in her world, safe meant forgotten. Then came the paintings. Down came Lydia's embroidered piece, the one with the small red barn she stitched on our 25th anniversary. In its place, Mila hung a black and white abstract painting. "Minimalism," she said proudly, as if the house needed less heart and more trend. Aaron didn't say a word. When I tried to ask him if all these changes really needed to happen, he smiled that polite, distracted smile and said, "She's just making it better, Dad. You know, new energy." Better, funny word. To them, better meant replacing history with something that looked good on Instagram. I stayed quiet. I told myself not to make waves, but it felt like every day a piece of my life disappeared. The wooden chair where Lydia used to knit, gone. The rug she chose for our living room, rolled up and taken to the garage. Even the small ceramic vase we bought on our 30th anniversary was replaced by a glass bowl full of fake lemons. "It's aesthetic," Mila said. One night, I heard her humming in the kitchen, rearranging drawers and cabinets. I walked in to get some water and froze. She had moved Lydia's Old Spice rack, the one with her handwriting on each label, into a box marked "Donate." I must have stood there longer than I thought because she looked up and said, "Oh, Ray, I'm just decluttering. Don't worry, you'll thank me later." Decluttering. That word hit me harder than any insult, because to her, my wife's memory, our 40 years together, was clutter. I tried to breathe to keep calm. I went out to the porch, sat in Lydia's old rocking chair and realized that even this one sacred spot was probably next. The next morning when I came back from the store, the chair was gone. In its place was a shiny patio set with plastic seats. "It's more practical," Mila explained, sipping coffee like it was the most normal thing in the world. Aaron was sitting beside her, scrolling through his phone, not even looking up. That's when it hit me, the house wasn't mine anymore. That night, I sat in the living room alone. Everything smelled different, looked different, sounded different. Even the clock seemed to tick louder, like it was reminding me time didn't care about who built the walls. My eyes fell on the shelf where Lydia's photo used to be. It was empty. I searched for it quietly and found it wrapped in newspaper, hidden behind boxes labeled miscellaneous. I unwrapped it and held the frame in my hands. Her smile looked softer than I remembered. I whispered, "You'd hate what they've done, honey." But even that whisper felt dangerous, like her name didn't belong here anymore. The breaking point came a few nights later. I was walking back from taking out the trash when I saw something new nailed to the front door, a little wooden plaque that read, "Home, Sweet Home, the Thompsons." The Thompsons, their last name. I stood there in the cold for a long time, just staring at it. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from something heavier, loss. I had carved the first nameplate for this house myself 30 years ago, the Cole family since 1986. Lydia painted the letters in soft blue. That sign was the first thing we ever built together, and now it was gone. The next morning, my neighbor, old Mr. Daniels, stopped by while I was sweeping the porch. He looked at the new plaque and then at me. His voice was low, gentle. "Ray, you used to be the man everyone came to for advice. Don't let them erase you." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, watching him walk away with his cane tapping against the pavement. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through every room of the house, running my hand along the walls. Every board, every nail had a memory attached. The dent by the hallway, that's where Aaron ran his tricycle into the wall when he was 5. The stain near the kitchen window. Lydia spilled coffee there while laughing too hard at one of my dumb jokes. I built this place with my hands. We built a life here, and now I could barely recognize it. In that silence, I realized something no one ever tells you about getting old. It's not just losing people. It's watching the things that kept them alive disappear, one by one, while everyone around you acts like it's progress. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all, not when they take your space, but when they take your meaning. I turned 66 that morning. I didn't expect much, just a quiet dinner, maybe a phone call from Aaron, maybe a little laughter to fill this hollow house. I woke up early the way I always do and made coffee the way Lydia used to, 2 cups, though one's been empty for 8 years now. Old habits, I guess. By noon, I decided I'd bake a cake. Not one from the store, but the kind Lydia taught me to make, chocolate with orange zest and a little hint of cinnamon. I still remember her saying, "A cake's not about perfection, Ray, it's about care." So I mixed everything slow, careful. I even used the same old wooden spoon with the chip on the handle. It took me most of the afternoon. 6 o'clock rolled around, then 7. The frosting started to harden. I checked my phone, nothing. At 8, the lights of their car finally pulled into the driveway. I told myself, they made it, that's what matters. Mila came in first, all perfume and energy, carrying a plastic cake box. "Surprise," she said. Aaron followed behind, holding a grocery bag with paper plates. I smiled anyway. "You didn't have to do all that," I said. Mila laughed. "Well, we couldn't let your birthday go by without something sweet, right? We picked this up at the store, half off, half off." They set it on the table next to mine. Her cake looked picture perfect, all icing roses and neat handwriting that said "Happy Birthday, Ray." Mine looked humble, uneven edges, frosting smudged, a little lopsided. But it was mine, ours, Lydia's recipe. I asked if they were hungry. Mila said she was starving, so I served the stew I'd been simmering since noon. The smell of rosemary filled the room, but no one said a word about it. We sat down to eat. I watched the two of them scrolling through their phones between bites, whispering about something I couldn't hear. I tried to ask Aaron about work, but he just nodded, eyes on his screen. Then Mila put her fork down and smiled, that kind of smile people wear when they're about to say something they've been rehearsing. "Ray," she started, "have you ever thought about selling this place?" I stopped mid-bite. "Selling it? She nodded as if it was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. Yeah, you know, this house is really big for one person. You could move to one of those senior communities, nice little apartments, activities, staff on call. It'd be safer for you, and honestly, it'd make things easier for everyone. For everyone, that phrase hit me harder than I expected. Aaron didn't say a word, just kept looking at his plate, pretending the conversation wasn't happening. Mila kept going. We could help you with the process. You'd get good money for this place. And we could take care of all the logistics. Don't even worry about the paperwork. I looked around the table, at the new white walls she painted, the glass furniture she brought in, the smell of her perfume hanging in the air where Lydia's flowers used to be. It felt like I was already gone, like they were just waiting for me to sign the papers and disappear quietly. I set my knife down gently, trying not to let my hands shake. You think this house is too much for me? Mila smiled again. We just want what's best for you. What's best for me? Funny how people use that phrase when what they really mean is what's best for them. Aaron still said nothing. Not even a look in my direction. The silence between us felt heavier than any argument we could have had. I stood up slowly. "Excuse me for a moment," I said, and walked out the back door. The night air hit me like a wave, cool, still, unforgiving. I walked down the steps to the garden Lydia had planted decades ago. The roses were gone now. Most had died after she passed, but a few stubborn ones still clung to life, their petals half wilted but proud. I reached up and pulled the cord on the old wooden lamp we'd built together. The light flickered a few times before glowing steady. It wasn't much, but it bathed the yard in that familiar golden hue. I could almost see her there, kneeling in the dirt, gloves on, humming some old country song while I teased her about planting too close to the fence. Inside, through the window, I could see Aaron and Mila cutting the store-bought cake, laughing at something on her phone. My cake sat untouched. I felt something in my chest, part ache, part rage, part surrender. Not just for what they'd said, but for what they'd stopped seeing. The man who built this house, the love that held it together, the promise that every brick carried. I found an old radio on the porch shelf and turned the dial. After a few seconds of static, a song came through, one Lydia used to hum while cooking. I set it down by the garden and let it play. Then, without really thinking, I started to move. Slowly, clumsily, just a sway, really. My hand hovered in the air as if she were still there. I let the music carry me one step at a time, the way we used to dance on nights when the world felt too heavy. I could hear laughter from inside, muffled by glass and walls and years of distance. But out there, under that dim light, I wasn't alone. I could almost feel her hand on my shoulder, hear her whisper, "Don't let them take what we built, Ray." The song ended. The night was quiet again. I stood still, staring at the glow from the kitchen window, their shadows moving like strangers in my home. And for the first time, I realized something. They hadn't just changed the house. They were erasing me. One polite suggestion, one redecorated wall, one half-priced birthday cake at a time. I turned off the light and went back inside. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The decision had already started forming in my mind. Sometimes the loudest breaking point doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it's just a man in his garden, swaying alone to a song only he remembers. The morning after my birthday, the house felt heavier than usual. The cake from last night was still sitting on the counter, half-eaten, icing hard as cement. I scraped it into the trash without a word. The silence was thick, but it wasn't painful anymore. It was clear, clean, like the moment right before you decide something big. I grabbed my jacket, got in my old truck, and drove into town. The man at the hardware store looked surprised to see me that early. "Morning, Ray," he said. "What brings you in?" "Need a new set of locks," I replied. "Front, back, and side doors." He raised an eyebrow. "All of them? That's quite a project." I just nodded. "Yeah, it's time." He didn't ask questions. Folks around here know when not to. By noon, I was back home with a small brown bag full of new locks and brass keys that shone like they had purpose. I laid them out on the kitchen table where Lydia's photo used to sit. The sunlight caught the metal, and for a second I could almost hear her voice saying, "If something's broken, Ray, fix it before it breaks you." So I did. One by one, I took out the old locks, the ones that had turned rusty with years and trust, and replaced them with the new ones. Each click, each turn of the screwdriver felt like I was taking back a piece of something I'd lost. I worked slow, steady. My hands were old, but they remembered the rhythm of building. When I was done, I wrote a note and left it on the table where they'd see it first thing. "This is my home. Respect earns entry, not entitlement." No anger, no apology, just truth. By the time evening rolled around, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet I hadn't heard in years. I made myself a cup of tea, chamomile, Lydia's favorite, and sat in the kitchen under the warm yellow light. I could see the driveway from there, could hear the distant hum of cars passing on the main road. The clock on the wall ticked steady like a heartbeat. Then came the sound of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across the window. Aaron's car. I didn't move. I heard their voices before the engine even stopped. Mila's sharp tone cutting through the night. "What the hell, why won't the key work?" A pause, then pounding on the door. "Raymond, open up, you can't do this, we live here." More knocking, harder this time. The sound echoed through the house, bouncing off walls that used to hold laughter. Inside, I stirred my tea, watching the steam rise. The spoon clinked against the cup, perfectly in rhythm with the knocking. The clock ticked between them, tap, knock, tick, knock, until it almost became music. Aaron's voice came next, quieter, almost pleading. "Dad, please, just open the door. Let's talk about this." For a moment, I closed my eyes. There was a time I would have run to that door, opened it wide, and forgiven everything just to hear him say Dad with love again. But I knew better now. Some lessons only stick when they cost something, so I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the noise fade into silence. Eventually, the car engine started again. Tires crunched down the driveway, growing fainter and fainter until all that was left was the ticking of the clock and the sound of wind brushing against the porch light. From across the street, I saw a figure under the lamppost, old Mr. Daniels. He'd been my neighbor since the day Lydia and I built this place. He must have seen the whole thing. He gave a little nod, the kind men give when words aren't needed, and called softly, "Good for you, Ray." I raised my cup toward him in a quiet salute. Then I turned off the porch light, went back to the kitchen, and sat there for a while longer. The tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. The house felt different now still, but not lonely, strong somehow. I glanced at Lydia's photo on the wall, her smile frozen in that old summer sun. "Guess I finally learned how to fix it, honey," I whispered. "Took me long enough." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of the loose gate creaking, same as it always did when she used to come home from the market. I didn't need to open the door to know peace had walked back in. For the first few weeks after that night, I didn't hear from Aaron or Mila. The house stayed quiet, and I thought maybe that silence would ache, but it didn't. It felt like breathing clean air after years of second-hand smoke. I heard through a neighbor that they'd rented a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy, just a cramped two-bedroom with thin walls and no yard. Aaron had to take a second shift at work to make ends meet, and Mila, well, she wasn't handling it gracefully. They'd gone from modern living to budgeting every grocery trip. The new car got sold, the gym membership canceled. Mila lost her job a few weeks later, something about team conflict, the kind of polite phrase companies use when they've had enough. I imagined the silence in their kitchen then. Funny how the world has a way of teaching balance. Meanwhile, my own house felt alive again, in a quiet, honest way. I started cooking dinner early in the evenings, just like Lydia used to. The radio played softly in the background, some old station where people called in to tell stories about family, forgiveness, and the strange way time heals you even when you think it won't. I'd catch myself smiling sometimes, not because I was happy exactly, but because peace, when it finally comes, feels like a reward you never thought you'd earn. One evening, Mr. Daniels came by. I saw his figure through the screen door holding a pie. "You cooking again, Ray?" he said with that grin of his. "Smells better than the diner down the road." I laughed and waved him in. "Come on, I made too much anyway." We sat at the old kitchen table, the one Mila once called outdated. The light above flickered a little, but it was warm, not harsh. Daniels took a bite, sighed, and said, "Looks like peace finally returned to your kitchen." I nodded. "Took long enough." He glanced at the empty chair across from me, the one that used to belong to Lydia, and gave a small smile. "She'd like this, you know, you standing your ground without losing your kindness." I didn't answer, just looked down at my cup and said quietly, "She always believed silence could teach better than anger." After he left, I went to the garage and started on a little project I'd been meaning to finish. A few weeks earlier, I'd met a volunteer group that built simple furniture for a nearby orphanage. They needed extra hands, and I figured I had two that still worked fine. Every morning since, I'd spent a few hours sanding wood, cutting planks, assembling chairs for kids who didn't have much. It wasn't charity, it was healing. The sound of the saw, the smell of fresh pine, it reminded me that creation always outlasts destruction. That's where Aaron found me one Saturday afternoon. I didn't know he was there at first. The door was open, sunlight pouring into the garage. I was sanding down the edge of a small chair, humming to the radio. Then I felt someone standing in the doorway. When I looked up, there he was. Same old jeans, different eyes. He didn't speak, just stood there watching. Behind him, his car was parked awkwardly by the curb. I could tell he'd been there for a while, maybe debating whether to come in or just drive away. I didn't say anything either. I just went back to work, sanding the chair smooth. The only sounds were the rhythm of the sandpaper and the faint hum of the radio, some preacher talking about how sometimes love is strongest when it's quiet. After a long silence, Aaron finally stepped closer. He ran his fingers along the pile of scrap wood stacked against the wall. "You still make all this stuff?" he asked, voice low. "Just the small things," I said. "Chairs, tables, nothing fancy." He nodded. His hand brushed the unfinished chair I was working on. "This one's for the kids' home." "Yeah." He didn't look at me, just whispered, "It's nice." Something in his tone cracked a layer of pride I didn't know he still had. He looked tired, older somehow. Not from years, just from life finally catching up. I didn't ask how he was, didn't need to, it was all over his face. The long hours, the weight of choices, the realization that comfort means nothing when it costs you your peace. He stood there for another minute, then picked up a small block of wood from the table, turning it over in his hands. "You sand this by hand." "Always," I said. "Takes longer, but it's worth it. Machines rush what hands remember." He nodded again, like he was really listening this time. When he finally looked at me, there was no anger left in his eyes, just understanding, regret maybe, gratitude even. He didn't say he was sorry, and I didn't need him to. Sometimes words ruin what silence builds. He set the block down gently, gave a small nod, and said, "I'll see you, Dad," and then he left. The garage stayed quiet after that, just the sound of the radio fading into another song. I looked at the chair, at the empty space where he'd stood, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but peace. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, just is. That night, as the sun went down, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, the way Lydia used to love. I thought about Aaron, about how maybe silence really does teach louder than words ever could, because sometimes the lesson isn't in what you say, it's in what you stop allowing. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm but not too bright, the kind of day Lydia used to call porch weather. I was in the yard sanding the arm of an old rocking chair when I heard the sound of a car door closing. I didn't look up right away. Over the years, you learn that peace shouldn't rush to meet anyone. It should wait, steady and quiet until it's earned. After a moment, I heard footsteps on the gravel path, slow, hesitant. Then Aaron's voice, low and careful. "Hey, Dad." When I finally turned, he was standing at the gate. He didn't have flowers or gifts, or any of those things people bring when they want to patch something over. Instead, he was holding a small wooden sign carved by hand. The edges were rough, uneven, but honest. He held it up a little as if offering proof of something. The words burned into the wood read, "Benton home built by Dad, lived by all." For a second, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the sign, it was the effort, the care, the time it must have taken him to carve each letter himself. He cleared his throat. I made this." His voice shook slightly. "I didn't realize how much you had built until I almost lost it all. I let her pride become mine, Dad, and it cost us both more than it should have." I didn't say anything, just watched him walk up the steps carrying that sign like something fragile. He looked thinner, older, but softer somehow. Behind him, Mila followed. She wasn't dressed up, no makeup this time, just jeans and old sweater, eyes red and tired. She stopped at the gate for a moment, almost like she wasn't sure if she should come in. Then she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I didn't come to defend myself," she said quietly. "I came because I finally understand." She looked at the sign in Aaron's hands, then at me. "I used to hate how much he talked about you, how much he adored you. I thought, maybe if I could make this house mine, I'd matter more. But I was wrong. I was jealous of the love that built this place. I can't compete with that, and I don't want to anymore." Her voice cracked on the last sentence. She looked down, wiping her eyes, embarrassed. Aaron put a hand on her shoulder, and for once there was no tension in that gesture, just quiet truth. For a while, nobody said a thing. The breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed. I looked at both of them, my son and the woman who'd nearly erased me, and saw not the people who'd hurt me, but two souls finally learning how to kneel before what they'd broken. I nodded toward the front gate. "You gonna hang that, or you planning to hold it all day?" Aaron blinked, startled for a second, then smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in years. He walked to the gate post, lifted the screwdriver from his back pocket, and started mounting the sign. Mila helped hold it straight. The sound of the screws going in steady, firm, felt like a heartbeat returning after a long silence. When they were done, Aaron stepped back and looked at it proudly. The sunlight hit the words just right and the wood seemed to glow. He turned toward me, still holding the screwdriver, and said softly, "You were right, Dad. A house isn't a roof. It's the hands that built it." I didn't need to answer. I pointed to the porch, to the table where dinner was waiting. "Sit," I said. "Eat." They looked at each other, unsure for a moment, then climbed the steps. Mila hesitated at the door like someone entering a church. The table was simple: stew, fresh bread, and 2 empty bowls I'd set out earlier without really thinking about why. One of them had always been Lydia's. I poured tea into 3 cups and set them down. No one spoke as we ate. The only sounds were the clink of spoons, the faint hum of the radio playing some old jazz tune in the background. But in that silence, something beautiful settled between us, something steadier than forgiveness, deeper than apology. Every once in a while, I caught Aaron glancing around the room, noticing the small things he hadn't before: the old photo on the shelf, Lydia's tea set back in its place, the curtains she'd sewn decades ago. I could tell he was seeing them for the first time, really seeing them. At one point, Mila looked toward the empty chair across from me and whispered, "Feels like she's here." I smiled. "She is. She always is." Aaron put his fork down and leaned back, eyes glistening just a little. "I don't deserve this, Dad." I looked at him, steady and calm. "Maybe not, but you're my son, and this is home. It's big enough for all our mistakes." He nodded, swallowing hard. Mila reached for his hand under the table and I looked away, pretending not to notice. We finished dinner quietly, letting the moment speak for itself. When they stood to leave, Aaron paused at the doorway and turned back to me. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said. "That garden out back, it could use some work." I smirked. "It's about time someone noticed." They both laughed softly, the sound awkward but honest, like a bridge creaking as it finds its footing again. When they drove off, I stepped outside and looked at the new sign on the gate. The words shone under the porch light. "Benton home built by Dad, lived by all." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could almost feel Lydia's hand slip into mine again. "Looks like they finally found their way back," I whispered. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt whole. 6 months later, the house didn't sound the same anymore. The stillness that once felt heavy had turned warm, alive. There was laughter again, real and unforced. You could hear it echoing through the open windows, spilling out onto the porch like sunlight. The kind of laughter that belongs to people who have finally stopped keeping score. Aaron and Mila came by almost every weekend now. They never stayed too long, never overstayed either, just enough to help with the yard, share a meal, or sit quietly in the living room where Lydia's photo still watched over us. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And sometimes that's the best kind of peace a family can ask for. Most mornings I spent my time in the small workshop I'd built out back. It wasn't fancy, just some tools, a few workbenches, and the smell of sawdust hanging in the air. But for me, it was a kind of church. Kids from town came by, teenagers mostly, some looking for direction, some just needing a place to belong. I taught them how to sand, how to measure twice and cut once, how to fix what they'd broken instead of throwing it away. There was a sign hanging on the wall above the main bench, carved out of maple wood. The letters were deep and steady, not perfect, but true. It said, "Respect is built, not demanded." Every time I looked at it, I thought about how long it took me to learn that myself. Respect wasn't something you could shout for or guilt someone into giving. You built it quietly, like the way you build a table piece by piece with patience and care. Sometimes Aaron came by to help with the kids. He didn't talk much about the past anymore, and I didn't bring it up. We worked side by side, and that was enough. Mila helped paint the sign out front, adding her own small touch to the place. And when they left each evening, the air between us stayed calm, not full of apologies or old wounds, just the quiet rhythm of people rebuilding something worth keeping. One afternoon, my granddaughter, little Emma, came running into the workshop. She must have been 5, maybe 6, wearing overalls way too big for her. "Grandpa," she said, breathless, "can I help?" I laughed. "Sure you can, sweetheart. But first, we gotta teach you how to hold the sandpaper right." She climbed onto the stool beside me, swinging her legs as I handed her a small piece of wood. We sanded together, slow and steady, the way I used to teach Lydia when we worked on our porch furniture years ago. After a while, Emma looked up at me with those curious eyes only kids have and asked, "Grandpa, why do you still keep Grandma's picture in the kitchen?" I paused, caught off guard by how soft her voice sounded. I glanced toward the window, where the late afternoon light hit Lydia's photo just right. Her smile seemed to glow a little warmer than usual. I smiled back. "Because love doesn't leave, kiddo, it just learns to be quiet." Emma thought about it for a second, then nodded like she understood more than her little years should allow. "So she's still here?" "Yeah," I said. "Everywhere." We went back to sanding, and for a while the only sound in the room was the soft rasp of wood against paper. The smell of pine filled the air. The moment felt still but not empty, like time had stopped just to watch us work. That evening, as the sun went down, I stood on the porch with my cup of tea. The workshop lights glowed faintly behind me, and I could hear the kids laughing as they left for home. The sign above the door caught the last bit of sunset, those carved words shining gold for a brief, perfect second. "Respect is built, not demanded." I thought about Lydia, about all the noise life throws at us, the arguments, the pride, the desperate need to be right. Somewhere along the way, I'd learned that none of that builds anything. What lasts is what's done in quiet, what's earned, not forced. And as the wind rustled through the old oak tree, I whispered something to myself I wish I'd understood years earlier. In a world that keeps shouting for attention, silence is the loudest proof of dignity. Then I turned off the porch light, let the night settle, and smiled. The house didn't need to be loud anymore. It had finally learned how to breathe. If this story reminds you of someone who taught you what respect truly means, share it. Family Shadows believes silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Subscribe, and may your home always echo with love and dignity.